house. Hopefully I don't sound like a robot this week. Well, today. The whole week, however. This is Rillian with the 2MK group, and today we are going through more basic training in Dragon Ball FighterZ. If you were watching last week and you realized that we were a little bit ahead of where your level is, well, not to worry, we are not moving forward this week, we're going back a bit to some of the initial things I was noting. It may end up a little bit more compressed, but you can be assured that we'll mostly be doing things related to people who are starting out, with some snippets of character knowledge and interactions that are for people who were watching previous ones and are more familiar with the characters you're seeing. So it's Amara on the controls today, despite the fact that my account is logged in. And what we'll be looking for first is back to the basics of when to try to switch character and what that does for your matchup stuff. In this case, Amara tends to use characters who are more similar to each other, and she has a relatively consistent style across the characters. This means that when to switch becomes a different thing altogether. Obviously, one should try to keep your situation positive so that you can switch out in situations like this. But it's not all that necessary, depending on when you're willing to use your sparking. But another thing that can decide whether or not you want to switch out is the matchup you're facing. For example, Gohan's ability to deal with Krillin is relatively high. Krillin has shorter normals, whereas Gohan has very long ones. And if they get into the quote-unquote zoning war, it can end in Gohan's favor fairly easily because he can make you instantly have to deal with him getting through your zoning. On the other hand, versus Trunks, Goku Black is a very good option because of his ability to launch attacks from fairly far away, allowing him to backdash out of Trunks' stuff and then go straight into attacks of his own without actually having to manage to get in via footsies. There's the indelible cross-up, and apparently the finish. That move has a very circular hitbox, you could say, making it very easy to get above someone's head and clip them with it. Your general hope in matches like that, and when you understand your own characters very well, is to buy yourself time to switch to the character you prefer for the matchup. For that, of course, you have to understand the matchup, but when your characters are very similar to each other, the situation gets a little easier to work from. Since you can't normally do it at the very beginning of the match, you normally have to find a way to get a hit, or fake your opponent into reacting to something that isn't real. Depending on which character you happen to be playing at the time, you have different options. Gohan, for example, is good as a point character for getting back out and not having to deal with it, similar to how Piccolo is. The main reason being that the opponent's methods of attacking this character are mostly easily avoided if Gohan really doesn't want to engage right then, making it relatively easy to set up a situation where you can clip them and then get out. Understanding specifically how to shift your characters, however, on defense is relatively executionally heavy in this game. Shifting your characters while on offense is much easier. You can just switch them in the middle of a combo when you're sending someone up. But if your defensive playstyle does not leave you a lot of opportunities for that, you have to find more effective direct ways to get it. One of these ways for many characters, especially the sort of characters that you see being played here, is to just hit their stand heavy in neutral, because normally the button is long enough range that it will move them forward without the opponent being able to do much other than throw beams of their own. And it also confirms into super dash or character change without you having to actually worry about getting too close to the opponent. It's fairly easy to just hit heavy and then change character. You can also change character here, but this is when you think your opponent is on defense. However, if you are concerned about your opponent being on defense and therefore being ready for your switch, faking them out and then hitting the Dragon Rush to get the opportunity to do it is usually a good option. As you can see, when you've gotten enough space and you think your opponent has made a mistake, you can also use it as if it's a punish. You can't normally hit them anyway, but getting out in order to do what you want is usually useful. Certain characters have moves that allow them to do this more effectively than others because of the way the moves chain. Which brings us back to what we were discussing before. Uses of meter to get the situation you want for changing character. Obviously you can use 1 meter to change character as a Z change on defense, but this is much more easily baited than the optimal option for zoning characters such as these. The optional option for zoning characters lies in something else that we discussed recently. The fact that you can always cancel a successful beam attack into a vanish. In other words, Goku is able to zone, and whenever his zoning attack hits, which is relatively easy to verify, just hit 1 assist button with forward, which you were probably holding anyway, to immediately try the assist change, or just hit vanish. When all of your characters have beams, therefore, it is easy to get yourself to flow through this correctly, and it happens whether or not you actually need to change character. As a general thing, having the feeling to simply do a beam into vanish can set up a lot for zoning characters. Depending on the opponent's height and the strength of their attack, you can also use it to set up Dragon Rushes to switch your opponent out if you really want to. As you can see, even if you are late on it and your opponent recovers away from you, they're either going to get hit by recovering the wrong direction, or whiff entirely without being able to harm you for it. And when you are a zoner, that is not really something you lose out by happening. They move further away from you, and that's it. since you can confirm whether or not the Vanish hit long before you actually need to do the Dragon Rush, you can use all sorts of things from there. It is therefore possible to build up an entire strategy for a zoner around hitting their beam into Vanish and using that setup when they have enough meter to control the flow of the match entirely.
This should be a great fight.
It allows them to keep the opponent far from them, regardless of whether or not the opponent feels ready or anything, and with some execution, to control which opponent character they're fighting if they happen to be on defense and all they can get is beams and don't want to try to change their own character off of assists. The downside to this being primarily that characters then need to devote a lot of their meter to this match pacing control rather than getting to do a lot of supers or conversions off supers. As you can see, once that space has been created, the zoning character is at much higher advantage because they are more familiar with that range, whereas most people tend to feel more of a need to get in. The main thing that holds you back then is the strength of your opponent's counter zoning. Due to the fact that in this game, as I mentioned, beams take a long time to charge up but cross the screen very quickly. It is easier to react to the beam itself if you are expecting it, but much harder to deal with it in terms of deciding to get out of the way of the incoming beam while you are already doing something else. In many other games, when you have started an action and this fireball is thrown at you, you will usually have just about enough time to, depending on the action, just not do anything. Just jump over it or something similar. This game does not generally work like that. You have to be watching your opponent fairly carefully, and if you've started your move already, you're not going to come up on top there. The beam itself will cross too quickly for you to do anything about it. You're just going to get hit. It's therefore much more important for a player who uses this zoning style to understand their meter a lot more and watch it a lot more. Fortunately, zoning characters have moves that take a long time to execute, but in this case, in this game, the opponent has very few ways completely around those moves that then lead to problems. In short, once you have done a Kamehameha, you have time to look at your meter because the only thing you care about is whether or not it hit. And if you specifically expected it not to hit, then you're fine. Zoning style characters in this game can often be characterized by that fact, that they have many moves where you don't have to pay attention to what is happening during the move. You don't have to watch for things like where exactly you hit, which way you need to confirm, whether or not your opponent blocked, and therefore which way you needed to branch the string. The moves just either work or don't. They're often safe-ish, if they hit, but unsafe if they whiff. And you basically couldn't do anything about it anyway. It's relatively linear and therefore sort of comfortable. I strongly suggest for players who play zoning style characters or who try to play other characters in zoning styles that you get used to the idea of doing moves and then checking your own meter while those moves are happening. Now the main weakness of zoning style characters in this game so far is that they all have short auto combos. You don't get to close space easily without using the same aforementioned safe specials. Your opponent is therefore trying to reposition constantly, but unlike most games where you would generally think I shouldn't use this forward moving special move because it's unsafe, in this game those moves, for at least the zoners, tend to be relatively safe. And they then knock the opponent relatively far away as well. Therefore it's easy to play them in a relatively relaxed style where you're either at stand heavy range and aiming to intercept your opponent that way, at approximately the range for one of your specials, or at zoning range. And once you're comfortable in that, you can start mixing up with things like this to force the opponent to go on proper defense. Your problem comes when the opponent manages to get close to you, but as a zoner you probably have worked out many times how to prevent that in fighting games as a generality, and how to manage your resources to fix the situation where it does happen as soon as possible. Your opponent in turn must often watch your meter to figure out when exactly you are vulnerable enough that they can get a good attack off. Unfortunately for zoning characters, because they don't often get the chance to land dragon rushes, they have to earn their meter in the very hard way, basing themselves on watching for their opponent's movements very, very carefully. It is easy to end up getting pushed around because one has run out of meter, and therefore the constant watching and waiting for the right moment, especially after you have used your meter on super moves, makes up a large part of the mindset required to play this type of character. Setting up your flow, however, is a different thing. Setting up your flow starts at the point of the match where you understand your opponent's movement, and therefore it takes quite a bit longer to get there. Whereas characters like mine who need to understand when the opponent will move, zoners need to understand how the opponent will move. Because the number of options that Goku, for example, has in terms of where to send his Kamehameha really don't help you unless you know where your opponent is going to go. If you are a Street Fighter player, the characters you should think of relative to this are Gouken if you played Street Fighter 4, and Urien currently if you played 3 or 5. Understanding the space that your opponent will stay at if you give them the chance is probably the first place to start. For example, Trunks tends to stay at a range where he's not able to do a lot of good attacks if the character is in the air, but if he moves any closer, he's at risk of getting hit by their stand heavy. This makes Goku a relatively good match against Trunks because Goku can put Trunks at situations that he doesn't need to do much in order to win out in that situation altogether. Goku can stay in the air, he can poke at things from various places, and the only thing he's ever really worried about from Trunks is Trunks' least safe move. And when you've gotten your opponent to the point where your opponent's best option is to use their least safe move, you've probably done decently well. As you can see, it's relatively easy to fake Trunks out with a lot of Goku's stuff. And to keep him away from you and relatively on the defensive. Gohan, on the other hand, is a difficult match for Goku because Gohan doesn't care about most of the things that Goku does. Gohan is much more easily handled by Goku Black, who can spend a lot of time moving back and forward without making it clear whether or not he actually wants to attack. And given the command grab style Kamehameha that he has, and his warp movement, there's not much that Gohan can do other than keep moving, which is precisely what Goku Black wants him to do. Learning to defend yourself against Gohan's attacks when he gets in close is quite a bit harder, but if you've got him out away from you, he can't afford to stay defending, and he can't run this gauntlet very easily. Whereas when you look at Goku's options against Gohan, they're mostly about Goku predicting things or moving forward, which leaves him open to a lot of terrible situations like this one. So in terms of raw matchup, Goku stays in against Trunks most of the time. And Goku Black against Gohan. Krillin, on the other hand, is mostly dealt with by adult Gohan himself because Krillin has to do so much more work to get close to do most of his damage. Gohan, on the other hand, has much better normals than Krillin in almost all situations that they would be in neutral, and has the capacity to just move across the entire screen before Krillin can do anything about it himself. Krillin's zoning, as specifically useful as it is and unconventional, doesn't lead to much when you're facing a character who can basically cross the entire screen on demand. Goku is not such a terrible matchup against Krillin either, but it usually requires Goku to be at absolutely full screen and try to stay there as long as possible. Krillin does not generally win out in the long-range zoning war versus Goku, but once he gets to about mid-screen, he has some options that get him around Goku's zoning based on the rhythm of the two players. Goku Black, unfortunately for Amara in this case, is probably least suited to fighting Krillin head-on since Krillin has so many moves that move him and will get him around Goku Black's attacks without him actually having to worry about it. The considerably better normals only work if Krillin has no option to just backdash out of basically everything. Against Goku Black, Krillin's best option is just to generally backdash. He saves himself a lot of effort by staying out of the way altogether. And so we're going through another rotation of the training group here.
Time to begin the match.
Which brings us round to the question of assists. Something that is much less meaningful when your team is Goku, Evil Goku, and Son of Goku. Given that your assist options are mostly get out of my face, get out of my face, and get out of my face some more. Here we have a lot more creativity in terms of both assist capacity and character aims while those assists are being called. Cell, for example, generally wants the help of his assists when he is on defense. He doesn't really need them to help him extend his combos because Cell is perfect and does whatever he wants while he's on the offense. He has good movement speed as well, so most of the time, calling anyone else to help Cell get in is a little less necessary. He can use his moves to get in, his various warps to get in, he doesn't care. Tien, on the other hand, is not as good at getting in directly. At mid-screen, he's a monster at it. He has some really good options. At full screen, he has stress. In the team you're seeing here, Tien is therefore able to use Cell's assist to help him get some space, get into that mid-range while the opponent is at full screen, with no real danger to him. And when he gets forced onto defense, call Gohan. Gohan's situation is a little bit of both. The cross beam for the win. Gohan isn't great at getting in from basically any range on his own, but he's really good at doing it with assists. And he can defend himself well enough that he doesn't have to worry about that latter situation. So here we have Tien basically on defense. He's sparking in this case, but could easily have called Gohan to help him out of that. And there you see the Cell to allow for extra pressure and lockdown. In this team though, whenever one character falls, the situation with the assist changes. It's actually optimal to engineer which of your characters is likely to be the first to fall for precisely this sort of reason. Gohan has the same requirements from both of his assists. Cell similarly requires the same things from both of his assists. In terms of being under stress, therefore, it's actually optimal for Tien to fall first. And it's actually also more likely for Tien to fall once one of the others has. The reason for that being that the opponent can then look and try to find which assist Tien no longer has to help him, and push to take advantage of that situation. Whereas neither Cell nor Gohan specifically needs Tien in order to do what they naturally do. They can manage with just the other character. So in this sense, the situation has turned out fairly well for that team because Gohan versus Trunks is slightly in Gohan's favor. Gohan is extremely good at punishing a lot of things with his EX moves. He has a couple of meter to do it with, and therefore Trunks really can't just attack blindly. He'll just die. Most of Trunks' meter, on the other hand, doesn't turn out to be that useful to him, as he was the point in the first place. He's not really built to use all of that meter in that way, and Gohan claims and holds on to the advantage. It is for this reason when you're choosing characters, not necessarily to choose characters based on their assists, but to understand what the assists are doing for you when you are playing, so that if you end up changing character, you recognize what situations are no longer good for you.
It's time to face your opponent.
Assists on Rune Siren's team are quite different in terms of what they're aiming for. Generally, these assists are used better for knockdowns and for lockdowns. Kid Buu is not a character that really needs a lot of help on defense. He has a lot of good options when he decides to jump out of stuff. He can hit fairly well when he bat dashes out of things. And as you can see, he's just generally good at holding on to his health over long periods of time. It's what makes him useful as a point character. He can hold on to a lot of health by hitting opponents with certain things, and generally pushes them really far away so that when it's finally time for him to switch out, it's not really that hard to pull off. As an assist to be called, he's exceedingly good at locking down grounded opponents. Something that he is basically doing when he's normally playing either way. So you don't even have to think about the character's assist differently than the character. Most of the time this is actually true. You can assume that whatever your character's specialty is in neutral is also what they are specifically good at when called. Characters who are different in this way are most of the team that I normally play, and Majin Buu. I would say Krillin is not this, but Krillin doesn't specifically do a lot of things in neutral. And the rock assist is in fact sort of a lockdown, so it's still functionally right. Vegeta Blue, on the other hand, needs his assists to cover certain spaces, because Vegeta Blue's general game plan is to be in the air. And while he is in the air, he can still call his assists. It's particularly useful, therefore, to not lose Kid Buu and use that to protect Vegeta's ground game. Protect against the opponent deciding to come in on the ground quickly when Vegeta's in the air. Depending on how close Vegeta is to the corner, Gohan is also a good option for this, allowing him to just basically float there and use his assist to cover the space directly underneath him, which is what his normal moves don't let him do. Whenever you're thinking about how to play your team, that is how you need to think about it. If you think about all assists in terms of offense or pressure, you may be missing a lot of the nuance you can get out of them. Where you want to be on the screen and the parts of the screen that your assists cover, if those two things overlap in a good way, you can probably trust that your team is good and comfortable for you. Goku is another good example of this, wherein you can, in fact, go up into the air, do a horizontal Kamehameha, and call Goku Black to do a grounded horizontal Kamehameha. Entire screen, all beam, all the time. Since your opponent's reaction to that is often to vanish, but because they must raw vanish, they won't necessarily do anything about it, especially if you happen to call... The execution is relatively hard, but if you call Goku Black first, there is no timing in which they can safely attempt the vanish. They're already blocking the beam. But if they were to jump, then the situation resolves itself. As you see there, Vegeta's attack specifically helps Buu because Buu wants to stay on the ground, but also wants to stick out buttons and attack, rather than having to do everything the same way all the time. Vegeta opens up the capacity for Buu to do this, especially when Buu has already gone into the air and wants the chance to come down on his own. Buu is not so great at attacking downward, but he also can't always afford to wait. At full screen, you can't just do Buu's downward ball and know that you'll be okay. That situation, for example, would have been a prime time to call about Gohan. It actually combines fairly well with Goku Black Super, especially if you think you're going to miss. Or in the same situation where you didn't realize that you didn't want to throw the Super for whatever reason, and you need to land now, your opponent's thought should be, I'm going to go catch them on their landing, and Gohan will deal with this for you. Goku has similar options. If Goku jumps into the air a lot while his assist is available, he's relatively safe. Another reason why this is so useful is that especially when you are far apart on the screen, you know that it's very unlikely that either of you is going to be putting the other in a blocked string very soon. There's a decent chance that your assist will be back by the time you need them. Pushing on people with your assists in pressure doesn't have to be exclusive to using them in neutral, especially after a scramble situation, or even better, in a relatively predictable situation. If you know that your opponent is not going to be able to get near to you just yet, move into the position where you feel safe, where your assist can protect you. For example, for Gohan, There are entire loops that Gohan can do with his elbow when being assisted by Goku and Evil Goku. Because he has a setup where you basically can't punish him. There are beams coming at you from one direction, and Gohan himself is coming at you from another one. Depending on the timing, you may not be able to punish this at all, and if you're not perfectly aware of the timing, there's very little you can do about it.
Get ready.
And as you can see, Goku is already back. If you mess up and you get hit, you lost nothing in neutral. Your opponent's combo is probably going to end before you have to worry about it. And then when the pressure situation shows up, they have managed to get the knockdown. Your assist is back. You don't have to worry about this. It was important to learn the exact timings for assists so you could easily recognize this situation. This allows Goku to play a very strange neutral game where he's not really trying to play neutral at all. He's just calling Gohan to keep himself safe and never actually fighting himself. The longer Goku can stay in neutral safely, the longer he has for his assist to recharge. In fact, this character team is basically all assists all the time. You never really have a moment where a whole set of stuff is going on and you are fairly certain that Goku is not going to be able to call an assist pretty soon. It helps that when one is up against a zoner, you generally spend your time wanting to get away from the long-range style situation. But wanting to get away from the long-range situation results in you having to deal with assists coming out everywhere to stop you from getting in. Goku Black is not as good at keeping his assists charged, but he's also much better at keeping the opponent in places where they want to defend. If he really wants the assist charge, he can just not do anything in particular. As you see right there, just dancing around for a little bit to recharge the assist will work because the opponent is generally too scared to just immediately head in at Goku Black. There's a lot of damage to be suffered by doing this. And there's the punish. Combine this with sparking, which is precisely why it works so well having Goku Black as an anchor character. The recharge of your assist is even faster, making it all basically this invincible wall of Gohan. As long as sparking is active, whenever you have the opportunity to call the assist cleanly, you probably just should. The rest of this match, however, is most likely going to come down to either fishing for big damage with Gohan, or using the meter to get vanish combos off of various zoning attacks. Gohan is super good at using up that meter in that way to gain advantage very fast, which also makes his strength as a counterpoint character, i.e. when you have done certain things and gotten away, so very high. He's never where you want him to be. Unless, of course, you're the one playing him. And therefore, you should think of Gohan sitting on a lot of meter as a serious force to be reckoned with, not because of his supers or because of his big damage, but because you have to catch him, and it's almost impossible to do this.
It's time to face your opponent. Get ready. Let's go.
So let's talk about when assists in pressure are really good. When your character is really good at playing neutral, or has some form of phenomenal defense, you don't have to worry about the fact that your block strings and multi-hitting moves freeze the assist recharge timer. Over time, you can learn to skew the way that you call your assists based on which type of character is on the screen at the time. Krillin, for example, normally needs to delay his assist calls, at least somewhat, because when Krillin does get a hit, he takes a long time to get back into the state where his assists start to recharge properly. Tien is also this type of character, but in Tien's case, he has a wonderful setup for the situation. The assist that he needs for defense and the assist that he needs for offense are not the same assist. So he can simply back off in the middle of a pressure string if somehow Cell did not manage to help him open them up. In Omni Rabbit's team, Adult Gohan actually plays a different role as an assist altogether. This is mostly because the way Krillin gets his pressure is different from most characters. Krillin is able to stay very close to his opponent, but not able to stay there safely. Krillin often isn't really concerned about who is assisting him. As long as they hit the opponent and keep them locked down long enough for Krillin to get back out, he's usually fine. He's not really trying to open someone up. He's more so doing a long combo, as long as he can safely do it, realizing, okay, this is not going to work, and then he just calls the assist so he can leave. The best part about Gohan as an assist is that Gohan's assist is pretty much instant. You don't have to wait very long at all. This makes him a very good assist for any character who is pressury, but their pressure isn't very much in terms of mix-ups. if you're trying to beat an opponent who is impatient and just hates being consistently hit by pressure strings, Gohan is a good assist for this reason. In fact, to the point where I'm pretty sure that if you are playing the game and you have a party match and you're able to play 3 of adult Gohan, he is weird in that he is so good at assisting himself. When you are done exploring which characters you want to play and have relatively settled yourself, you absolutely should try to spend some time making yourself think of your assists as just other special moves your characters have that are sometimes not available. This will help you become more comfortable with the team, but it's slightly sad because if you do it incorrectly and then realize you really want a different team, then you have to start all over. And no matter what you do, this will always feel a little bit stressful. It's good to have training partners who will be a little bit merciful or who will help you set up similar situations most of the time so that you can practice your spacing relative to the neutral assist game. But without this, you're probably fine. Your assists are also a good way to help you through the beginning part of the match, where your point character does not have any meter yet and can't do much of anything. For certain characters, this is actually required. You can play any point you want, but just bear in mind why you played them and what your assist will allow you to do. For a zoner, this is really important because the spacings that they must use tend to lead to them either doing a lot of damage or taking a lot of damage. But as you can see, since adult Gohan is generally so good at counter zoning, you have to bait him into a lot of things. Fortunately for many people, he's not so good at dealing with counter pressure. If you do get your chance to get near him, you don't even really need to actually hit him. He's not so good at punishing out of block strings in the first place. So with this character, you're generally not trying to keep yourself away from him for very long. Unlike Vegeta, where most of the time you don't want to be anywhere near him. This is a sort of game where it is completely to your benefit to make entire plans in your mind, entire theoretical situations, specifically as to how you intend to do your matchups, your meter usage, and your characters in terms of how they flow. Theory fighting is absolutely useful in this sort of game, especially if you have a lot of time to make a lot of theories. This is because universal mechanics mean that you generally don't have to worry about an opponent locking down one of your options entirely, and you can just use it until you have a better idea of how to deal with the situation. This can actually increase the fun factor of the game simply because you spend more time thinking about it. One example here is that getting Gohan out of here is probably the best thing that can be done at the moment. Because while Trunks is not necessarily a bad matchup for Adult Gohan, there are not many directly bad matchups for Adult Gohan. Depending on your fighting style, it may not work out so well for you. And this is where, above all else, understanding how to make sure that your opponent is pushed out by your Dragon Rush takes precedence. Which of your opponent's characters do you want your current character to be fighting? If you have control of that, you have control of a lot of things. At that point, once you've done the theory crafting of what exactly you are trying to do with your characters, you can actually have a clearer idea of whether or not your execution is going the way it should. It's hard to have a truly good handle on whether or not your execution is succeeding or failing when your primary things are not directly planned. If you end up mashing buttons in neutral or just doing combos that you've practiced countless times, you can't be sure if your execution as a generality is good, because you will just be using muscle memory and generally just pushing buttons and winning off of rhythm situations.
Are you ready?
It's difficult to understand exactly how panicky you are, for example, when most of what your execution practice is your own combos. Fortunately for us, many of the things in terms of the game's pressure are solved basically by wake up, deflect. It is necessary to watch carefully on your own knockdowns though, to see if you've been knocked down in a way that actually causes you to bounce, or not. Because generally when you have not been thrown down to the ground, you are expected to tech and not to do anything relative to those types of things. Those combos become stronger when the opponent has got you to the corner, and it is at that point that it is often necessary to use your invincible moves or other similar setups to get out of them. Since once you are in the corner, your opponent has really no reason to actually give any hard knockdown setups, leaving you basically unable to react, because when they go over your head, they are actually directly over your head. There's nothing you can specifically do to deal with the pressure. Characters that have invincible reversals can often get away from this, but depending on the opponent's timing, the pressure just becomes unrelenting and you have functionally no options. Or this is to say that you could guess right, but your opponent's chance of guessing right is much, much higher than yours. Among your main options are fully invincible wake up, using your sparking blast to knock them off, attempting to dash forward, not necessarily because it will save you, but simply because it will cause their combo to go in a different direction, and most characters cannot put you back into the corner that way. You just have to sometimes take the hit and dash forward instead of doing anything at all. This can be a little difficult to get used to against many characters, the idea that you just have to let them hit you when you're cornered. But it might not be so bad if you focus yourself to thinking primarily that getting out of the corner is more important than not taking any damage. This is particularly true for zoners because zoners need to have somewhere they can go on the screen, or their zoning doesn't really work at all.
私を待たせる。どうした？俺か。破れるとは。オラが相手だ。マセコ
Having eliminated Adult Gohan adds a huge amount of capacity to Goku because now he can basically zone a lot more safely. On the other hand, having lost Goku Black means that there is no way to actually directly make that zoning work against the Buu at full speed. Having to constantly switch your mental stack of which matchup you are playing is part of what makes these games so difficult. And the dash under light. Since Buu is a character that locks down your backdash in almost all situations, not only is Buu a relatively good match against people like Krillin, he's also relatively difficult to zone out. Not specifically because you can't stay at the other end of the screen and throw zoning moves at him, but that they will effectively do nothing.
It's time to face your opponent! It's all or nothing! Let's go!
Which brings us to the other way that defensive characters can change their situation like this. Sometimes it's worth it just to use the meter, knowing that your opponent will put you under pressure, just immediately use the meter to change to the next character that you want to actually use. This is what the Z change mechanic is for, and while it is relatively difficult to execute when under pressure for people who are now starting out at the game, it's probably worth their effort to do because it will push things fairly far. The mindsets used by defensive players are often foreign to the rest of us. But I would say probably the easiest way to understand them is simply that when you shift from one situation to another, most players are thinking about what they want to do next, and defensive players are thinking about what you are going to do next. Now we have the advantage situation where Trunks is trying to face off with Goku. And that's how that goes.
Should be a great fight! Are you ready? Fight it out!
Another deeper key lies in understanding when to use your Vanish to get you out of trouble, even when this is not going to lead to you actually getting any damage, or even specifically lead to you being safe. Both your Sparking and your Vanish are decent options for getting out of particular types of pressure in the corner. Fortunately, these two are not difficult to recognize for most characters. If you have an invincible reversal, but don't have a meter for it at that moment, usually level 3, your Sparking will often do the job. When your opponent is going for something that they expect you to block, so that they can continue their pressure and give you more stress, and the mix-up is that they will either do that or go for a Dragon Rush, you can generally just vanish out of it. The easy way to tell these apart is mostly whether or not your opponent leaves the ground. If your opponent leaves the ground in order to do their attack, chances are you need to use your Sparking or Invincible Reversal. Or, as I said before, dash forward and hope it saves you. If your opponent's pressure does not involve leaving the ground, and is either a move, an assist, or something similar, you can be very certain that attempting to vanish out of it is not going to lead to you taking a lot of damage. Most of the time when an assist is called in that situation, they're not actually expecting the assist to hit you. And while you cannot necessarily consistently vanish out of Dragon Rushes, Dragon Rush timing on most wake-ups is quite difficult. Giving you a lot of good options for either blocking and hitting your Vanish at the last moment, or mashing Vanish and blocking at the last moment when you realize you've stood up. This will keep you from being predictable and allow your opponent basically no time to decide which of those they should be doing, since Dragon Rush in this game requires a lot of commitment. You can see it coming, basically. Whether or not it works has more to do with your opponent than you, but at least you will know that it did happen, and you can see what their tendencies are. Of course, the best part of vanishing out of your opponent's corner combos is that now that they're in the corner, even if they've delayed it and hit you, they're now the one with the lack of space to retreat into. Depending on the character, this can be really devastating for them. The main thing one usually needs to understand is that defense is nearly never a sure thing in fighting games. You must watch your opponent's offensive tendencies quite heavily to understand the best options on defense. Your goal generally is to play neutral as well as you can so that you don't have to deal with that very much. But if you're failing at neutral, rather than specifically pushing yourself to get back out, sometimes, depending on how early you are into the match, just take the loss and instead watch what your opponent does on your wake-ups. Do they need a lot of meter and therefore more likely to Dragon Rush? Do they feel confident in their ability to pressure you without that and be likely to do jump-in attacks? Do you need to use your Sparking Blast to save yourself or your level 3? Or can you just wake up, mashing vanish? All of these little things are decided more so by your opponent's tendencies than anything about the game. And if they violate those tendencies, then you're just going to take damage sometimes. There's nothing you can specifically do to change this. That, for example, was functionally just a good wake-up. There was no specific reason why an opponent would or would not have been hit by that. It's just something that happens or doesn't happen. I love that drop into beam thing. As you can see, this time, it's basically the same thing, but it just works. There's no way to be absolutely sure whether or not you should just wake up level 3 or not. Go with your gut. So putting this together from the Amara versus OmniRabbit perspective. OmniRabbit generally wants to try to switch characters as soon as Amara does. The goal therefore would not to be to try to get advantage, but simply negate as much advantage on your opponent's side as possible. Gohan versus Trunks is advantage to Trunks in many situations, particularly when neither of them has meter. But switching to Goku to try to get advantage should generally cause OmniRabbit to switch to Gohan himself. The best option therefore, switch to Goku Black and hope everything works out. But as noted, one doesn't necessarily do this immediately. Because why bother doing it immediately? You don't necessarily have any loss yet. And your health is decent and you'd still be able to regain some if you didn't. However, at that moment, Gohan has some health to recover, and Goku Black has at least a little meter to keep him going. So now the advantage isn't on either side per se. Krillin can handle this character decently well, or use up a lot of energy trying to do otherwise. And yet, somehow we ended up back at Gohan Trunks. Now in this case, for example, we know that Goku can take a couple more hits than the others, and that he manages better without meter in this situation. Which has effectively forced Omni Rabbit to bring in Trunks, who is not at advantage in this matchup. Trunks must now do the point character's job of rebuilding meter so that the others are dangerous, without any real benefit to how he should be able to do it. And with that situation turning against him basically all over again. Fortunately he has sparking, but in terms of tactical style of play, this really hasn't gone particularly well toward Omni Rabbit's side. Fortunately, this match is disadvantageous enough to Goku. That the match has probably been decided more so by the interactions between who had which characters on screen when, than by anything related to actual damage output. One team just gets more chances at the relevant situations than the other team. And the team with the more chances wins the game.
Goku-san, 俺の修行の成果いかがでしたか? Trunks, win! もっと強くならなければまだ見ぬ敵を倒すために yourself for the coming battle.
Fortunately, this matchup actually starts like that. With no particularly strong strengths or weaknesses against each other, Adult Gohan and Cell can just play out the point versus point matchup without much need for any changes at all. Whereas, neither player has any good reason to switch to one of their other characters too quickly. Teen Gohan versus Adult Gohan is generally in the favor of Adult Gohan due to Footsie's ability, if enough not damage, and Teen Gohan wouldn't have the meter to work with at that time. If he gets it though, things can get hairy. Whereas Cell has a decent advantage against Goku Black, simply because Goku Black's movement doesn't catch Cell very easily. Goku Black, on the other hand, has relatively heavy advantage against Teen Gohan because, as much as Teen Gohan can move around and punish a lot of things, punishing Goku Black is actually really difficult. It costs a lot of meter to punish even basic things. This matchup, on the other hand, is mostly the same, despite the fact that Goku can try to zone out Teen Gohan. There's not really much to be gained there. Goku versus Tien, on the other hand, is relatively advantage to Goku if the Goku player is good at zoning. But it costs a lot of meter to successfully do it. There's a lot of vanishing and moving around involved. But Tien doesn't have that many good approaches that Goku can't deal with in some way. Tien's ability to punish Goku Black, on the other hand, is relatively high, and Tien does not need to stand still long enough to be worried about most of Goku Black's attacks. And this matchup is much the same. They are able to fight it out, but not really too well from either side. So we end up going back to the Gohan versus Cell match. And victory goes to Cell today. However, Goku Black is still effectively an anchor character in this team, and therefore has at least some ways out of these situations. His warping movement means that generally Cell has to do things like that at long range to make sure that they don't cross each other in the sky and end up in scramble situations.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess!
貴様の相手はこの俺だ。
It's all or nothing! Go!
Of the available characters to phase Majin Buu with, the decision is more so about the style of the player than anything else. Generally, Gohan can use his invincible moves to stay out of a lot of bad situations against Buu, but they are relatively easily baited compared to most things. Therefore, it becomes easier to deal with this with Goku Black, who can cover a lot of space in front of him with very basic projectiles and make sure that there's no way for Boo to do anything. Similar problems occur for Vegeta, because while Goku Black is not really particularly good at targeting an aerial Vegeta Blue, he also doesn't really get hit by a lot of stuff without being able to go into the air himself. In this case, for example, you can afford to switch to Goku against Gohan, knowing that Gohan needs to switch out soon anyway. You can't really risk that much. And with enough meter, Goku versus Boo is fairly heavily in Goku's favor. Boo's meter does not lead to Goku taking a lot of damage, but Goku's meter punishes Boo for a lot of things. Unfortunately, here we have Gohan back, but now he actually has health. And Sparking to cover that, leaving Goku at disadvantage. But with enough Sparking himself to reset most of the situation. Gohan deals fairly easily with Vegeta Blue, especially once he has all of his setups ready and has powered up enough to basically react to Vegeta's zoning with his elbow. However, without him actually being in his powered up state, Vegeta has a massive advantage. Therefore, it's almost all awareness and clarity of thought when it comes to these sorts of things. And once again, we have the reverse, which is very important for the way that you decide between playing Goku and Goku Black. Goku's attack takes a long time to start and instantly travels. Goku Black's attack takes a short time to start and relatively longer to travel, like your standard projectile. There are times when this is the thing you actually want. Your opponent attempts to do something on reaction, but they attempt to do the wrong thing and are therefore at a disadvantage.
Get ready for a DragonBall Rumble!
So what you see in our current training group, if we count adult Gohan and Cell as relatively similar characters, a lot of mirror match style options are available to various members of the team. This means that there's a tendency for matches to stabilize during that phase of it, and whoever manages to get the most advantage or understand their meter situation the best at that moment is likely to come out on top. If you are not sure when you are doing the correct thing or not, mostly what you need to think about is when you had an opportunity to defend yourself with your assist and fail to take that opportunity. Once you understand your characters, once you are past the point of the game where you are having a character crisis and you are fairly settled in your characters, but feel as if you're still not doing as well, that's probably the key to when you can most improve your play. When your assist could have helped you and you didn't recognize it in time to use it. Because matchups, while you can try to learn matchups first, matchups usually have a lot of levels of depth that require a lot of thought and can be thrown off by someone doing something you don't expect. Whereas basic interactions between your opponent and your character's assists generally don't tend to change as much in matches. So if you're looking for a way to quickly improve and make sure that you don't get too stressed out by the matches, you're generally aiming for that. Especially since matchup stuff will come up on its own once you have reached the point where you're either playing point at the end or you're not doing so well and you are out of assists to even use. At that point, you get to learn all your matchup stuff then. There's no need to focus on making sure every switch is the perfect timing or that you're fighting the right character with the right amount of meter. These things will lead you to improving, but they tend to lead to improvements a bit later on. In this case, for example, we're getting to see the Vegeta Blue matchup against multiple characters, regardless of the fact that anything else was happening. In this case though, Adult Gohan and Cell are at different places in the teams in this matchup. The question becomes then, is it worth trying to get Gohan in to face off with Cell? Since Gohan is generally not a character with a lot of bad matchups, but Gohan wouldn't have any meter yet. Optimally, therefore, one aims to gain the meter with Boo, and then get Gohan in. There are two ways that this is normally done when Gohan is not your point. The first is to build up 2 bars of meter, manage to hit with some super and get in, and call Gohan to power himself up when he enters with his own super. The other method obviously is to just change mid-combo, but because Gohan can't do his super in the air, and most of the combos that set this up easily are aerial ones, you might find yourself having a little difficulty getting Gohan back into neutral to do what you want. Fortunately, that move is basically invincible, but you could definitely still get trapped or caught in some seriously devastating mix-ups, depending on your opponent's character. But once Gohan does make his way in, he can at least handle Cell if Cell appears, has an advantage against Team Gohan, and is more so worried about Tien's meter than about Tien himself. This is still a generally good situation for Tenshinhan because by the time they've managed to set this up, Tien has enough meter to do a lot of damage. And here we see Tien, who is again not really a zoner, more of a mid-range character, and therefore has some good forward-moving auto combos. Unfortunately, this matchup is probably the worst, because Kid Buu can do whatever he wants against Team Gohan with very little repercussions. Even Gohan's assists do not help as much because Buu's pressure is extremely non-linear. Fortunately, Cell is able to quickly turn this back around. Unfortunately, Cell's meter is similar to the others where most of it will end up being used for EX moves, direct pressure, and vanishes. Making it relatively easy to bait your way to a victory with him. Well, against him. Especially if you are very, very patient. Moving too much is a quick way to die yourself. And vice versa. So obviously that came down to the wire quite a bit. And it is something you have to be careful of in this game when you are trying to figure out how to maximize your finishing blow damage. It may be better to go for something that allows for a setup off of your level 3. Or rather to set up your level 3 by using the invincibility to fake out your opponent, than it might be to use it to finish the combo, because if it doesn't kill, then you don't have anything to finish with yourself.
This should be a great fight. Get ready.
This is usually the easiest way to set up a favorable situation for Gohan. Dance around in neutral until your opponent lets you get the Dragon Rush, and then you have enough meter to do what you want. Given the invincibility of most of Gohan's stuff, he can't really pressure you all that hard. Even more usefully, setting up that same sort of situation is still advantageous in terms of game plan, if your opponent decides, I'm going to switch out to a character who can deal more damage to Gohan or stop him from powering up, so you then have to switch him out, you could simply do this and have someone else take most of the damage instead, while still retaining all of that meter you spent building up to Gohan. The key is knowing when to actually bother to activate Gohan's ability, rather than rushing to do it. Whether or not your character has good meter advantage against other characters in the team is part of this theory crafting that you can use for yourself. Strategically speaking, therefore, this match is actually still even, especially with Sparking Blast available on both sides. The thing that will make most of the decision in who wins this matchup is more to do with the execution than about matchup itself. Goku, particularly defensive Goku, stands up to Tenshinhan fairly well. However, once that hit is landed... Huh! Wait, wasn't that supposed to be tomorrow? Well, it looks like Bandai Namco has chased us to Thursday, but we got 2 hours this time instead of 1. So obviously we'll be ending stream early. And probably yelling at them about the fact that they said it was 16th, and today is definitely not the 16th. That said, we definitely managed to cover a lot today. And presumably, anyone watching and anyone playing has a lot of theory crafting to go think about and possibly discuss. So join us next week when we'll be going back into the next half, well, the other 2 quarters, to put it most clearly, of strategy required to move forward in Dragon Ball FighterZ. And by then we will have the patch to look at. Depending on what actually patches, we might see more of that being discussed than specific thoughts. But remember to grind your execution, everyone, and make sure that you understand why your assists are able to help you cover space rather than just give you pressure. Because pressure, eventually someone will figure out a way out of. Neutral is called neutral for a reason. This has been Rillian with the 2MK team. See you tomorrow if you are interested in any of our Street Fighter V content, and Monday for the same, and next Tuesday for Guilty Gear. If you are primarily interested in Dragon Ball FighterZ, we'll see you next week Thursday. Good night, everyone.